Hi, my name is Beth Hunter. I run a nonprofit initiative called FoodBridge, which works across Canada, but mostly in Eastern Canada. Pretty new, been around for about a year and a half, and is looking to accelerate our collective progress towards regenerative food and farming, mostly working with buyers, big and small, and then farmers, researchers, government folks. My background is agricultural economics, and I've worked most of my career in nonprofit organizations somehow related to food or farming, and also in philanthropy, so private family foundations. And a couple of years ago decided I really wanted to do something more concrete in relation to the biodiversity and climate crisis, and decided to create this initiative. And I think, as you probably all know, well, I don't know if you feel, I feel there's a momentum building. And one of the places where there's momentum building is among buyers, food companies that are setting targets. Often those are net zero targets, or sometimes biodiversity or regenerative agriculture targets. So being able to go beyond the target setting and figure out how to implement better support for producers to take up regenerative practices is what FoodBridge is really working on. And one of those regenerative practices that we're particularly interested in is crop diversification. So we've heard a bunch about that today. And but of course, farmers always say we need markets if we're going to diversify crops. So looking at what buyers can do, creating new markets, ingredient substitution, and just changing up which crops are grown, is part of that. So we do research, facilitate collaborations, and then operationalize them, and make spaces for discussions like this one today. So we really wanted to frame this around how do we monetize soil health practices, which is a big question, and you could talk about the word monetize. But I think it's really around how do we get a diversified, regenerative, or sustainable product into markets and into the value chains, and what are the barriers and opportunities for that? So we're super fortunate to have different representatives of that value chain with us today. So we're going to start with Dean online, who sadly had to fly up to Winnipeg. So I'm going to do a little introduction of each of you before you speak, and then they'll have a chance to tell their story, and then we'll have some discussion up here, and then open it up for you for questions. So Dean Bose is actually, like so many farmers that I have met, is not only a farmer, is also a CPA at Deloitte, for Senec accountant. He farms his family farm, which is 160 acres, with his wife, has begun farming that 20 years ago. But because of the size of the farm, decided to diversify into a malting company. So he now runs Mississippi Mills Malting Company. It began in 2019. Wait, no, 2021, 2 years ago. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Dean, to just tell us more about your story and what your approach to malting is in this local context and in the context of a circular economy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I don't know that there's a whole lot more to tell. That was a pretty good summary. So I'm sorry I can't be with you. I really hope that I could be, but the day job is fraud investigations. And when things happen, sometimes you have to move quick. So that's why I'm in Winnipeg today and not sitting on a stool up there. I guess, so we did start, my wife and I took over our family farm about 25 years ago. About 20 years ago, we started farming. My family had a farm machinery dealership, so they kind of stopped farming themselves because when they should have been in the fields, they were working on farm equipment, selling farm equipment, that kind of stuff. So they made the choice to kind of just commit to that, and that's what they did. But I'd always like, because growing up out there, I'd grown up working on farms as a kid and being around the shop, and I always kind of wanted to get back to agriculture, and because of the work that I do, and obviously traveling so much with a young family, I want to be back around home more too. So my wife and I started to look at, how could we on a small farm, and make the farm kind of into something that could support our family. And for us, like, starting out with like pretty modest equipment and pretty modest footprint, growing to a scale of commodity farming that would support us just seemed kind of unachievable in a way. And so then we started to look at, where could we add value to the crops that we could grow, and that's where malting, sort of the concept of malting, came out of it. So as a starting point, I thought, well, if my customers are going to be brewers, then I should maybe learn a little bit about brewing beer. And so I started home brewing, and I thought, like, worst case scenario, at least I've learned how to brew beer, even if nothing else happens. It's still kind of a win. So did that and started to meet some brewers just to kind of understand, like, is there actually a demand out there? And could we be competitive? And so it was a few years coming, but finally we made the decision, and about 3 years ago, that we're going to go ahead with this, and got financing in place and bought equipment and started production a couple of years ago. And it's been it certainly isn't easy by any stretch, but it certainly has been very rewarding. And so we have kind of a base malting company now. We malt about 250 tons of barley a year, so not a huge amount. And honestly, just a drop in the bucket compared to what the local demand for malting barley is, for malted barley is. And we're hoping to expand probably at least triple our production over the next couple of years, and hoping to acquire over the summer our next piece of equipment and be up and running kind of next fall with that. So that's kind of.
And can you maybe just fill us in also on I know you said you grow much of your production, and where you buy your barley from?
Yeah, we grow about everything comes within a tractor drive of our house, essentially, of our farm. So we grow about half of it. So we have our farm, and we have a couple other farms that we rent. And then about two or three of our neighbors, depending on the year, grow the rest for us. So one of our neighbors is a hay farmer, and when he's rotating out hay crops, he rotates into barley now. So he supplies a good amount, and then just another farmer down the road who's kind of interested in the project and always grows, 30 or 40 acres for us. So.
Okay, great. We're going to come. I have more questions for you, but I'm going to just keep going with the stories, so we have you all in front of us. I'm moving over to Meighen, who is with Avling Brewery. He's a former chef, and a brewer and a restaurateur. So Avling's Kitchens and Brewery is in Leslieville in Toronto, which I had the coincidental joy of eating and drinking there a few weeks ago. They opened in 2019, and they also have a rooftop garden. So can you tell us a bit about the business and how you got to this particular business and your interest in regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we opened in 2019, and in the process of leading up to the brewery opening, originally the idea was really trying to bring together my time in restaurant kitchens and my time brewing, and approach beer from a bit more of a culinary perspective. For a long time, it was sort of more is more, and works well in the craft beer space, but it sort of was so foreign to me from, as I say, coming from kitchens. So was definitely looking to think a bit more locally from a sourcing perspective when it comes to brewing, which is quite novel. It was novel then, still is. But certainly I sort of thought of myself, particularly in Toronto, who's going to care? Another brewery, like, who needs another one of these? And fair enough, I need more people like you in the city. And it really came together when I had the good fortune of going to a restaurant in the Hudson Valley that was really focused around creating demand through their restaurants. How effective that is can be debated, certainly, but their idea was to create demand for cover crops through the restaurant, through the sort of platform they had as a sort of fine dining restaurant. And so that's kind of where a little bit of a light bulb moment happened for me. And I said, okay, maybe a brewery instead of a restaurant can step in to this process and create certainly a larger market than either a bakery or certainly a restaurant could provide for grain, and obviously particularly malting varieties of barley. So we've worked with Dean since he opened. We've actually also worked with a small group of women that are no longer operational, but a small group of supply chain consultants that helped us identify farmers that were interested in not only adding barley as a cover crop, but we're also interested in sort of mutually beneficial marketing, promotion, storytelling that kind of went along with this. So Andre's been one of those farmers, and we're kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit in terms of the brewery going out and finding the grain and bringing it to the maltster, and then making beer with it, which is a completely ass backwards way of doing it. But in many respects, it's sort of true to what the brewery and the restaurant is all about. Just mention of our rooftop farm. Obviously not a commercially viable operation. We're 450 square meters, 6,200 square feet, planted up on the roof. And really the main idea behind that was to kind of make tangible, like make it concrete for people visiting us, the type of practices that a lot of the farmers, a lot of the suppliers that we work with are using. So we plant about 1,000 heads of garlic every winter. That's pretty close to being pulled out, and right now there's lettuce growing in between all those garlic plants. We've got alpine strawberries that do really well on the rooftop, hot peppers, radishes, turnips, sort of list goes on and on, but it's all done with an eye to, again, sort of demonstrating a lot of the principles that were brought up earlier about diversity, keep it covered. Unfortunately, we can't have any animals up there. We'd love to have chickens, but it's like in Toronto. I find it's just a really impactful story to be able to put a plate in front of somebody and say, this beer was made from grain that was harvested, and then cows went over top of that stubble. So you've got beef from that same farm. Next to it is a tiller's radish that we've grown on the rooftop that's been caramelized. And so it's a full plate that kind of tells.
You're serving with that? Yes, food. Yeah.
They need a little bit. I think you need to like braise them and caramelize them, but they've got.
Does that mean you put brown sugar on them?
We don't, but you could. Yeah, I would know. Yeah. But had no complaints. People love them. So that's a little bit about us and the kind of sourcing practices that we've begun and are looking to hopefully expand on.
Thanks. And relevant, before I pass it on to Chris, relevant to his work is I hear you have a whole animal kitchen. Is that true?
It was true. Yeah, it was true. Certainly running a restaurant, much like running a farm, is a sort of constant balancing act of compromise and understanding what your market is looking for and what you can pull off. And when we started, we kind of tried to go all in with sort of a circular approach. So we had an on-staff butcher. We'd bring in a side of beef and a full pig every week and go through 100% of that. And that led to a lot of trims. We, not only sold burgers in the restaurant, we sold burger patties through our retail store, did a lot of our own charcuterie. But the cost of having a butcher on staff and the fact that on any given night we couldn't say, hey, we've got a ribeye on, because there's so many ribeyes and beef, and so we'd have to say we've got a butcher's cut on. And people didn't understand that. They didn't know what whole end butchery was. They didn't give a shit. So the cost of doing that has proved unsustainable. We do continue to work with small scale beef farms. There's a great one near Tweed, Ontario, named Enright Cattle that have bought their local abattoir. So to keep that step in the process small and controlled and at a scale that's more manageable. But unfortunately, yeah, we had to.
Well, it'll be interesting in the discussion to come back to this question of what the consumers or the end eaters are willing to do and not do. But let's move on to Chris. So Chris Moore is with Shady Creek Lamb. So grew up on a mixed farm with grandparents' farm and a dairy farm.
Yeah.
And on that farmland, in the 90s, I think, switched from dairy to cattle.
Yeah.
To beef, sorry. And now switched again to raising pasture-raised sheep and also maple syrup.
Oh, yeah.
If that's right.
Well,
Because I
you
got some of this
maple
information
syrup.
from the website, so now.
Yeah, I guess
So
that.
complete incorrect.
We don't do maple syrup anymore. We used to, it's kind of got too busy and got away, but definitely something I'd like to return to.
Okay.
The sheep farming's right. We were trying to do the sheep. There's like this thing in Ontario where you put sheep in an old dairy bank barn to raise them because the barn's empty, and instead of letting it fall down like it should, you put animals in that the air was never designed to change for, and you try lambing when it's too cold, and you just work yourself to death trying to make a living. And when I finally gave up on that and realized that there's solar power plants that need the grass cut, we started cutting grass at solar power plants with sheep. We're doing 800 acres this year, 600 ewes of our own with lambs, and then another 500 ewes that I'm custom grading so far. And then when the grass stops growing at the solar, we switched to cover crops for the most part. Crop after last year we grazed till February 13th. Here in Renfrew again.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you sell your sheep?
Well, our sheep or lambs?
Oh, sorry, you lambs.
They both go to the same spots for the most part. We do go some through auction barns. Too many, in my opinion. I don't like doing commission and trucking, and I just don't think it's a good way to market our animals, taking what we can get that day. We do send a fair number direct to processor. I really like that. Building that relationship with the processor, I think, has a lot of value. That he knows that we want to keep growing, that he can be confident in expanding his business to take more of our land. Really good value. And it saves a lot of trucking and saves all the commission. And then we do sell some direct either to households or to restaurants that will do whole animals, because it's really hard as a farm to have enough shank to keep a restaurant going for a week at a time. And then what do I do with the rest of the animal? Really challenging, unless I can find like 7 restaurants that are willing to be like, yeah, I'll take shanks, I'll take legs, I'll take necks, loins, racks. So it's, and then all of the exact same number would be, then I get into freezer space, and we're poor farmers, we just can't afford it.
And there is some circularity in between some of you directly or indirectly with the feed, is there not?
Yeah, so I do feed brewers grain, and I know that Dean is pretty good at drinking beer. Last week.
It's just a rumor. Yeah, and like the tailings off our cleaning plant, off our malt cleaning, go to a beef farm. Could quite easily go, to Chris's sheep too, if there was ever a need.
And a hay farmer that grows some barley for Dean also trucks my sheep, also hauls Reuben's grain.
And we help them with hay when we're not busy with other things.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow, all kinds of connections. I think that's probably part of it. Okay, so now we're going to go into variations on questions about sort of why you do what you do as far as sustainability and these regenerative approaches, I guess. So I think Reuben maybe you don't need an introduction, but you can kick off this question. In the context of this, how do we monetize soil health practices? What's your take on how you clearly do so many different practices, and some of them must be in the long run cost savings or building resilience. Some of them may be cost savings in the short run, and others they're just an additional cost, like an ecosystem service to society, to the planet. So how do you see what the cost of doing soil health practices are, and how do you calculate that when you think about it?
Yeah, so I guess, and that's really the start of this business here, Valley Bio, where we're sitting. So we started cleaning seed in 2014, okay? And a big part of that business out of the company and what we've matured into is this cover crop seed business, because of the at that time fairly early demand for cover crop seed and soil health practices, and the realization that no-till systems plus cover crops is a heck of a lot better than just no-till on its own. More recent years, the benefits of cover crop systems and capturing atmospheric carbon, purifying water, more societal benefits there. And that's driving policy decisions at the government level to encourage and initiate more cover crop seed use. So that's monetized our business really, because we benefited greatly from that early on, because when we're selling a commodity seed crop, which we also do, whether it be wheat or soybeans, cereal grains, whatever, we sell to guys that are growing that as their normal bread and butter commodity crop. But they have many more options. They've got the big companies offering them their inputs, the Fortivas, the Bayers, there's many retails for that, and they're all competing in the same space. Cover crop is a whole new market for seed sales outside of the prime season. And those acres are becoming very, very big acres. There's a lot more we can do in Ontario, which is great. It's more opportunity for us. But we've exported a lot of seed and product outside of Canada and into places further afield for them, that we're a prime area for growing cereals, barley, rye. They're great cover crop species, maybe a lot further south where they want to grow corn and beef and they want to add some more diversity. Well, we're better off growing cover crop species here for their seed stock down here. So that's been great for us to monetize that business there. And it's being encouraged not only by us, but by society as a whole, is helping push that way forward through bureaucracy and government policy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. I want to turn back to Dean to ask you, I know you have an interest in environmental sustainability, and you were telling me that in terms of your customers, the breweries, that interest varies a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about how do you see your customer interest in sustainability generally, I guess, and then if you want also soil health and regenerative practices?
Yeah, I think there's quite a wide range actually in our customers in terms of why they would use our malt versus using malt from a big distributor, a big supplier. I think often it'll come down to sort of the marketing side of things, and if we can sort of tie into their marketing in a way that allows them to kind of differentiate or appeal to their customers in a different way. Some customers probably just are so disconnected from agriculture that they don't even realize that that this is a thing, right? Like what we're talking about. And so there might be a bit of an education there, and others like Max are very, very connected to it and actually driving it. For us ourselves, it's certainly something that we think about a lot. We think about it not only because like it's the right thing to do, but even from a crop inputs perspective. And I think like probably everybody here will sort of appreciate that crop input prices are increasing and increasing. If there's a way that we can cut back on our reliance on commercial fertilizers and pesticides and fungicides and all that stuff, like the accountant in me is quite interested in that. Over and above that, we just kind of think that it's the right thing to do. So I guess that's kind of how we're seeing it, and with our customers, like social media is a big way for them to connect to their clientele. So the more that they can kind of show that story sometimes and get that out there, that'll help them to differentiate and drive business a little bit too. So if we can kind of tie into that, create some awareness, help them with the marketing, and then just kind of do the right thing for our farm and our soil and our environment, then that's we see that as sort of a win-win-win, I suppose.
Yeah, great, okay. Max, I think you're the one who's probably the closest or most frequently in contact with the end eater or drinker. So can you tell us a bit about what's your sense of your customers' interest in local, sustainable, and then again, although it may be too sort of techie or specific, but agriculture, soil health, what's your sense of where they're at?
Yes, a great question. And it's actually been a big struggle for us to communicate the full breadth of everything that we're doing, and kind of break it down into digestible pieces, I guess pun intended, for people, so that the marketing is effective. The marketing actually does have an impact in terms of making us the sort of brewery of choice or the sort of neighborhood restaurant of choice, because people go, oh, there's this they're doing, there's this they're doing, there's this. So we've had to work really hard to kind of understand what goes over people's heads, what people kind of can inherently understand, and really kind of hammer home those kind of points of accessibility. To Dean's point, that the kind of disconnect between sort of cereal grain, barley, which then goes through another process, malting, which is incredibly opaque for most people, and then ends up in the brewery and somehow gets turned into beer. Like that, there are a dozen steps in there that people have no clue about. So we kind of find we have to break it down to really simple little taglines like locally grown beer, drink beer, grow soil, those kind of things that are essentially meaningless but kind of buzzy enough that people kind of they get it. And then what we found that's incredibly powerful is if they want to learn more, if they're interested, if they kind of have express, and well, what's all this all about, we can literally just take them up one flight of stairs and sort of say, we're not growing, we have grown barley on the rooftop, but we can say, here is lettuce and garlic being intercropped, here are radishes and carrots next to one another, here's a field of radicchio, there are several different varieties, we're running vegetable trials through at the EFAO, and we're doing that. It originally began as a bit of a novelty. EFAO administers the organic seed improvement trials every year, and we did it just to sort of see if people would care, see if there was interest. But after the first year of us reporting our results, they asked us to come back and do it, to continue to do it as rooftop agriculture. Certainly by no means will replace conventional agriculture, but kind of be an additional point of diversification. So, our high drainage, low organic content soil has been something we've had to sort of work with and understand what works well in there. We've bumped up the organic content by a considerable factor. But at the end of the day, it is really a place where we can take people and kind of they can really literally get their hands dirty and understand it on an innate level.
And is there an additional cost to the local and sustainable sourcing And if so, are your customers willing to pay?
This year,
more?
no. This year, everything costs an absurd amount.
Yeah.
Basically, kind of commodity prices caught up with everything else. Slight exaggeration, but not by much.
Only 7% inflation.
So, and people, you know, it's sort of, we work hard to sort of, keep our beer reasonably priced. We have cold day in hell before I pay $10 for a pint, or sell one. But you can find that in the city. So the food is where we've had to kind of make up a little bit of that, but we're fortunate. The idea of having a restaurant and a brewery was always, there was wholesale, there's on-site retail, there's lunch and dinners, there's events. And so we're not just relying on, you know, one dinner service 6 or 7 days a week to float our, you know, food costs, our labor costs, and everything else, rent, utilities. We've got a bunch of different areas in which we can sort of drive revenue, and so that's helped absorb it a little bit. The cost increases a little bit, but it's incredible with how much kind of local. It's been affected somewhat, but it's basically just kind of everything else catching up to
Right.
what we're paying for.
Yeah. Chris, same question to you about
Oh,
your
thanks.
customers. I know you have there are these different types of customers, and what's your sense of what their interest in sustainability is?
Okay, I don't
Soil
know.
health and soil health in particular.
I don't know if there's, on the wool side, none. That's not really even part of the business. I guess one of our biggest customers would have to be the solar company. And the sustainability there of having sheep grazing instead of mechanical mowers is huge. And then we're still learning about getting that carbon down in the soil and increasing organic matter. And sheep grazing solar panels are one of the best ways to actually do that, I think. So from a sustainability point, that's a huge driver for them. And that's a pretty big part of my paycheck.
Mhm.
Are there any solar farms that are doing agrivoltaics?
Well, river graze and sheep.
Is there some, yeah?
I don't know of any. I understand there's a Canadian agrivoltaic group. I haven't heard of anything at scale, but I think raspberries are an option. I'm trying to get my sheep on every solar site that I can right now before it takes off for other things. I tried getting this to take off across the province with sheep, and got a buddy started at it last year and was lamenting my frustrations that it wasn't being picked up better. And he's like, Chris, there's no reason there needs to be any other people than us doing it. So somebody with 36,100 ewes says, let's just do them all. Let's just do them all.
That's a really good segue into my next question, which I'm just going to throw out there, and whoever, I know several of you said things about this. I know you have something to say about it, but it's about how influence, like how change happens, and including between, like how change spreads, including between you, sort of business to business, peer to peer, between farmers, between business people. You're all leaders in this space, and what's your sense of how the relationship with your peers helps to sustain you in that work, and also what's the pickup you're hearing from other business people, other farmers around wanting to take on these kinds of.
Dean's going first on this.
Dean, you want to go first?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I guess I could say it's very organic. It happens at the sort of at the farmer to farmer relationship level. My neighbor, a hay farmer, there's no reason for him to grow barley necessarily. He just wants to support my project. We can kind of make it at least as profitable as anything else that he's doing at the time, but he's taking on extra risk doing it, straying outside of what he knows. I connected with Reuben through other agricultural sort of connections that we'd had, and Reuben supplies rye now for Top Shelf Distillery in Perth. So a lot of it is just, I think, through relationships and a bit through trust as well. And there seems to be a desire to try something different out there as well, for farmers, I think. And a lot of the farmers that I've talked about, as we expand, we'll need more barley. A lot of the farmers I've talked to about it seem quite willing to try something different and try something new. I think there's a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit to farming in a way that we tap into. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but that's kind of how it's evolved for us.
That risk thing is like you mentioned, like that's huge. And whether it's being an accountant or making sure that you're growing some crops at least that have crop insurance or having production insurance, like farming's risky. That's one of the reasons we took on so many solar sites so far apart was if one area is really dry, maybe the other spots aren't so bad and we can just move the sheep, right? So mitigating that risk of being different too, but also like having that backstops.
Yeah, you don't have to go to Vegas to gamble, eh, Chris? You can do it right now. Bury $100,000 in the ground and hope for the best.
It's not that much money in
It's
like you can burn through it pretty quick.
yeah,
And not have anything in China.
yeah. That's right.
What's your take?
Well, it's carrots and sticks is what's coming to mind for me. So there's farmers coming to soil health. They're either getting sticks. Some ways they're getting sticks from government. So you better look at this. Or I think it's depends on the producer a little bit if they can look at the consumer on the other end and say, okay, well, is that consumer telling me how to do something, and is this a stick hit me in the backside to say, okay, smart enough, or is it an opportunity, a carrot to be a leader with something, with some practices. So there's things that definitely change. Everything's gotten more expensive. Fertilizer, the inputs, that's probably the biggest key thing that incentivizes a producer into taking the initiative to look outside of their comfort zone into some new practices, because they need to innovate a little bit to mitigate the cost side of their balance sheet.
It's a good question. I mean, again, sort of another similarity between restaurants and farming, there really are no guarantees. And I think in a place like Toronto, any way in which you can stand out and be a little bit different goes a long way. And so I think there has been incentive. There's been, for us, a kind of return on taking a few risks and sort of trying some things out. I mean, there's also a bit of got a bit of a sort of defiant streak to it. When I reached out to the University of Guelph to see what they were doing about barley breeding, they said, "Oh, you should talk to this guy," and he said, "You'll never grow malting barley in Ontario." And so that kind of made me want to look into it even more. But yeah, I mean, there's sort of there's lots to lose technically, but it's just initiating these types of projects and bring various people together.
It's a lot more work, right? Like to sit there and order off, but like just sit there and order off a Cisco truck.
Yeah, but ordering is whether it's a Cisco truck or whether it's, I mean, there's been
Going out and finding all the different farms and stuff like that. That's a huge challenge compared to, the sales guy comes in, gets some boxes, and
I mean, we don't, it's not a farm for absolutely every single ingredient. There's a group called 100 Kilometer Foods, which has been hugely influential for the restaurant scene in Toronto in terms of being a kind of middleman marketplace for small scale, not solely organic, but small scale independent producers that produce that have a certain ethos that aligns with a lot of what we're talking about. So they've got an online, sort of ordering system that's been huge for us. We still go to Cisco for thread wrap and canola oil and things that, but again, even canola, that's kind of coming in line with one another. So canola from Cisco and canola from 100 Kilometer and canola from
sunflower. Can't think of the guy's name down by Norfolk County. he's pressing sunflower canola, I can't.
Pristine gourmet.
Packages, yeah. And we would use a lot of pristine gourmet stuff via Palmer, so they sell through there, and so, cool. Yeah, that's always been kind of what I've realized is a bit of a sort of tangent, but very quickly I realized, there is a market, people are interested in this, they do want to engage with it. It is the infrastructure and the sort of, the middleman, that is where it all kind of falls apart, you know? And there are certain systems that kind of make it more difficult. Chicken quotas and graded eggs come to mind. But really the sort of amalgamators and the market and sort of finding a marketplace is the big one. And as I say, 100 kilometers is huge for them.
Okay, we've got about 10-15 minutes left, so I want to open it up to.
I'll just ask a question to Max and by extension Chris. Do you notice that you have any repeat customers? That you have people that are continually coming back to use your services or your products?
We have like return services, products, for sure. The restaurant business through COVID has been pretty fucking tough. Starting my French, like it was brutal.
Yeah.
So that was really hard, I think. And then it's really hard when it's so much easier for us to do whole lamb. Like we might think we're big with 600 ewes, but to try and keep that 35 shanks and all that kind of moving, we need another person, and that's really hard. That would be definitely a target. The butcher shop, every 80-pound lamb I can bring, they'll take.
Yeah, I'd say
Every 80-pound lamb.
Every 80-pound lamb that I can produce, he'll take. Like, yeah, he loves the quality, Mr. I'd rather take them a little heavier, but for his customers, 80 pounds that the finish we're putting on, that's perfect.
Yeah, I'd say, it doesn't matter whether you're like a fast food joint or fine dining. Hospitality lives and dies on repeat customers, and we're in a residential neighborhood, so we are sort of keenly aware of who it is that comes back in, over and over again. We've got people who come, 1, 2, 3 times a week. And through those type of customers, they're kind of our best source of information as to what's resonating, what do people understand, what are people kind of absorbing, because as I say, we consider kind of our market anyone within sort of a 20-minute walk. That's kind of who we're aiming the majority of our food and services towards. And so if we can talk to those repeat customers and sort of see what's landing with them, then we kind of take that as a rough yardstick to say, okay, that's probably going to play with the sort of broader network that we're trying to appeal to.
Yeah, well, just wanted to say thanks. The excellent day. Thanks, Max. Thanks for
I didn't really do much. But it's nice.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.
You guys want some drinks for the road as well?
I have a couple other questions, but I want to make sure that anyone who has questions.
Sure, do his customers, would they pay a premium for like a grass-fed like lamb, like what you're doing? Or
Not really. So those 80-pounders, no, his customers are not paying a premium for 80-pounders or better quality. His customers are just docking from that 80 pounds, right? Like, so if it's over finished, they're docking. If it's under finished, they're docking. If it's heavier than 40 pounds of carcass, they dock it. Like it's like a cultural thing, right? Where this is what it needs to be, and if it's not that, then we pay less.
Okay, so there's no difference in how that.
No, that would like to take a 120-pound grass-fed lamb. I'm getting my own customer for that, not his, but I'm still using his services for processing.
There's a question over here.
I was just curious, this area, there's a lot of commodity farmers and
they're just going, it's going for animal feed, or what's to convince some of these bigger guys that go towards different markets, because I mean, it's kind of a niche thing right now.
City of Ottawa is banning solar farms and renewable energy on their ground, or they're talking about it. And their reason for doing that is for food security. But corn and soybeans are not food. There may be ingredients in processed food, but they're not real food. That if the conversation stays on food security, beans to be exported to Rotterdam isn't really food security. And we can produce really good products here and maybe market them after processing around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and it's kind of, I think, something that we have tried to talk about as much as we can as as the market is representing sort of the market for these types of products. It's, you know, tiny that we are. It's hopeful, or I'm hopeful that it's sort of, you know, this is part of a larger trend, a larger shift. But I mean, to sort of build on Chris's point, yeah, I mean, not to be sort of flippant about it, but by some estimates, you know, 40% of food that's produced could disappear, and it wouldn't make a difference because 40% never makes it to anyone's fridge or plate. And I've seen some estimates up to 60%. So the idea that 60%, 40 to 60% of farmers are farming just for their products to get lost somewhere in the production chain, the value chain, and literally never see you know, an end consumer. That's just with the current climate, that just is not sustainable, I don't think. So I think probably it's right now, yes, it would be a little bit uncomfortable, more than a little bit uncomfortable. That's kind of addressing it, like, yeah, it would be a shift. It would be difficult. It is difficult. But I think it's sort of, you'd be an early adopter, and it'd be a whole lot less painful when you probably are going to be forced to do this down the road. And that's kind of my speculation, but it seems quite likely.
That's a really good segue for me, because I'm going to take another try at this. So if you look back at policy 20 years ago, when commodities weren't worth anything, and the farm bills that came out from the big dog down south, and the incentives that got put in place around energy production, that's led to the commodity production system that we have in North America today. And right, commodities around here, but we're not a commodity region. We don't have the infrastructure for it. We don't have the production zone for it. Guys are trying to grow commodities here, and we're never going to get we've lost our rail lines. We can't even ship stuff out of here. So, and highways going to be another 20 years coming.
What's the cost per ton to go to Prescott?
Costs $35 a ton.
It costs 17 to go. Sorry, 11 to go from Prescott to Rotterdam.
It wouldn't be far off. So we ship to Rotterdam from here in containers, and it's the worst part of the whole trip is to Montreal. So once it's Montreal, it's gone, and it's cheaper than Montreal to Rotterdam than it is for here in Montreal.
It's the bulk truck transportation and the fact you can do it on rail, container, all that kind of stuff. Right?
Yeah, and we can also broker stuff from Western Canada over there too. That's if we're brokering loads from the west, again, the worst part is Montreal, right? So it's not near as bad because they're on rail, and they've got intermodal handling stations in the prairies and in Chicago and in these other places. We are at a severe disadvantage. Yeah, here. So it's going to be tough. Now go back to this policy decision that led to this commodity business that we're in, that started 20 years ago for ethanol, fuel, and big corn. And if you look at the most recent farm bill here now that's going on, there's very different things. Right, so there's some of the biggest investments ever, like regenerative type agriculture, right? Like what got my head into cover crop space really 10 years ago was SAR subsidies into cereal rye cover in New York and Pennsylvania. So we sold 800 tons of rye in 1 year in south of the border. And it was all went into corn silage or soybean with predominantly guys that had never done it. So there's big incentives there, but I think this is where a lot of the investment from government policy is going to be going in the future. Because I don't think this differentiation between food and fuel and what is food and what's not food, I think is starting to get clarified.
Dean, do you want to add anything to this question in one point?
Well, I think I kind of heard the question. I think it was just sort of like how do you convince large commodity farmers to kind of play in this space?
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, so for us, like we try to be a bit part of the solution. So we try and make it at least cost neutral or a little bit more profitable for them. Try and de-risk it by not having prices that go up and down by the day. That the price that we sort of offer at the start of the season is what you're going to get in the fall, and there's not going to be any playing around with it at all. So being reliable and just building that into the cost structure for our end product effectively. So that I think that's kind of it. And then also, like, I think a lot of farmers do like to see, like Max was saying, like that kind of like the end product, right? So to be able to have like a case of beer, or a bottle of vodka or whiskey that was made with your grain is like, that's kind of neat for people too. I know it is for myself. So to be able to say, like, this came from your crop, right? And I want to give this back to you at the end of the year, just as a thank you, right? So those have kind of been, I think, keys for us.
You have a pretty big bar now?
Do you have a pretty big bar?
Bar, yeah.
Oh, well, it's not bad. Yeah, it's not bad. I think we have three beers on tap at the malt house and 3 more on tap up at the main house. And the fridge is usually very stocked, so they're not for sale, but stop by and have a beer with us.
One last question.
A question follow up on this question. I guess if you have some large commodity farmers that are looking to get into this space, do you see like a market? Because what you're doing, you're selling seed, right? And it goes down south. Like, is there a market? Let's say I've got, a couple hundred acres and want to grow some of these crops. Is there a market where you can like buy, that just like I would say to an elevator, and then you export it to the States or wherever? Is there enough demand for the seed, or what else? Because otherwise it would be animal feed for a lot of these things, right? Or I guess it could be intercrop, it could be different things, but is there a market for those crops if you're not going to grow corn and soybeans?
It's not just about not growing corn and soybeans. I think it's more about practices, because you do see there are programs starting to roll out from big multinationals. Like Cargill has publicized programs to enroll farmers in producers, like very large scale producers, into these different categories. So I think some of that is just around carbon credits. But there's an incentive there if you're a producer that's supplying to Cargill to sign on to get premium or something like that. I'm not sure how they're running the program. I'm not sure what all the stipulations are on it, but it's certain things where they're aggregating societal services provided by farmers that Cargill's then selling to the marketplace. Right? So that's at the upper end and extreme end of things. How much of that is actually monetizing to the farmer to the upper extent? I don't operate on $35 an acre plus minus to me doesn't sway my decision making process. But for some guys in the Midwest, it might on that extreme commodity case. Right? If you're producing 10,000 acres of corn, all of a sudden it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
Okay. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. We said we were gonna finish around 2, so, thank you so much for coming in.
Your customers would think it's a big farm. Like, right, like a 75-acre strawberry patch is a lot of strawberries, but it's not much sheep pasture.
I think if you have most people in Toronto, like, you're better to describe it as like a 75 football field strawberry farm, like an acre, hectare.
Yeah, it doesn't mean.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much. Thank you, each of you, for the other panelists. Also, thank you for hosting us.
Yeah.
Reuben and Keenan, and the Ontario Soil Network for organizing, and Laura for organizing. Ray. And thank you everyone for coming. And the amazing lunch. It's been a great day.
Thank you so much for listening in to Valley Bio Shop Talk 2023. We are hoping to do more events just like this one in the future, so keep your eyes open to our Facebook page, our Instagram, and our website at valleybio.com. If you'd like to do your own cover crop blending quote, you can head over to our website, and on the header you will see cover crop seeds. Click on that and it'll take you to our cover crops page, where in 3 simple steps we have it laid out for you. Learn about the crops and what's available. You can create your own mix, so go ahead into the cover blender. And then step number 3 is to order them and get them planted. So we also are offering drone seeding in the future. So the cover blender, when you click on that, takes you to the form where you just fill out your information, your goals, your field size, what kind of seeding method you are doing, soil type, is your soil drained, and other information that will help us help you decide what's best for your field. Once that's filled in, you hit next, and it'll take you to where you can select which crops you would like to use. Again, if you have any questions, email me at laura@valleybio.com or contact us to book a consultation. We look forward to hearing from you and to seeing you at our future events.